Larry Tangle was the best dog in the kennels. Not that anybody knew that. Larry Tangle didn't even know it himself. Larry was a 5-year-old Springer Spaniel, and he'd been at the kennels now for about 2.5 months. His previous owner had had a heart attack. He was an elderly gentleman, and he had taken good care of Larry Tangle. But when they took his body away, they also took Larry away. The old man's relatives were happy to take his house and his car and his collection of antiques, but none of them were interested in taking Larry. It seemed that none of the dogs stayed at the kennels for more than 3 months, so Larry was calm and patient. He always tried to take care of the new arrivals who would turn up afraid and whimpering and shaking. "Hey, it's okay," Larry Tangle said to a young and frightened bulldog with a patch on his eye. "I was scared too when I first got here, but it's not so bad. They give you food and shelter, and we all do our best to have a good time." There weren't many toys at the kennels for the dogs to play with. There was a blue ball and a red ball and an old piece of rope. When the dogs had been allowed out of their cages to run around for a little while, Larry Tangle always made sure that the 3 toys were put away in a tidy fashion, the way that he had been trained to do at home. This often meant that he was the last dog to return to his cage. One of the workers at the kennels was a cruel young man. He would always squirt Larry with the hose for being the last dog back. Larry didn't like this. He didn't like it at all. But he knew that it was important that the toys were put away tidily in case someone was to trip over them. And anyway, even if he wasn't the last dog back in his cage, then some other dog would be, and then they'd only end up getting the hose instead. Sometimes people came to look at the dogs. Families would arrive in big, noisy cars, and excited children would run out and they'd charge up and down, looking in all of the cages. The other dogs would wag their tails fast and hard. They'd run up to the cage door and poke their wet noses through the gaps. They would squeal and yap and bounce around like ping pong balls. On the contrary, Larry Tangle would sit there as still as a statue, the way that the old man had taught him. He would face forwards and he would wait his turn. But more often than not, his turn never came. The excited children ran straight past him. And so it was, Larry Tangle was never taken home by any of the families. Larry didn't mind too much. One of the dogs was getting to leave, and that was a wonderful thing. And Larry knew that none of the dogs ever stayed at the kennels more than 3 months anyway. He knew his time would come. One evening, there was a new arrival, a Jack Russell, an older-looking dog. "Brought here to die," he said as he paced up and down in the cage beside Larry. "Brought here to die after all that, after everything." "Hey," Larry said. The Jack Russell stopped. He looked at Larry. "It's all right," Larry said. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The Jack Russell gave a wry smile, shook his head, and continued to pace. "It's true," Larry said. "I mean, I know it's not much, but it's safe here. We all get along. We have fun with the 2 balls and the rope." The Jack Russell was not paying attention. He muttered to himself as he paced from one side of his cage to the other. "How am I, an old dog like me, going to find a way out of here? No chance, no chance, no chance in the world." "You'll be fine," Larry said. "Listen, nobody ever stays here longer than 3 months." The Jack Russell laughed. He stopped pacing and walked towards Larry. "You know why that is, don't you?" Larry Tangle didn't really understand the question. He shook his head. The old Jack Russell laughed again. "Oh boy," he said. "You don't get it, do you? You stay here for 3 months, it's clear no one wants you. So they take you away to make room for some cute pup to move in, 'cause they'll at least have a chance of selling him on." "What's wrong with that?" Larry said. The old Jack Russell closed his eyes. "They ain't taking you to Disneyland, kid. They taking you away for execution. They kill you. Larry was shocked at this. Why would anyone want to kill a nice dog like him? He was about to ask the Jack Russell when all the lights were shut off. Larry knew that it was time for bed, time for quiet. He lay down on the ground and closed his eyes and waited to fall asleep. The next morning, Larry woke up to the sound of his cage door being opened. "It's time," said the cruel young man. He attached a lead to Larry's collar and yanked him out of the cage. "Time for you to go, you scruffy little pooch." Larry Tangle had been looking forward to this moment for some time. But after last night's conversation, he had a real uneasy feeling about it. Was the old Jack Russell right? Was Larry being taken away to be executed? His legs began to tremble as he walked. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Could this really be the last walk that he ever went on? "You're heading to a better place," the young man said. He laughed and patted Larry roughly on the head. It was the same kind of laugh that the young man gave when he was squirting Larry with the hose. Larry knew that something wasn't right. The young man opened the kennel's gate, and Larry turned his head to get one last look at the place. He saw that the toys in the yard were put away in a tidy fashion. He saw that the young bulldog with a patch on his eye was sitting in his cage, being patient and well-behaved, the way that Larry had showed him. It turned out that this was the last walk that Larry Tangle ever took. About a week later, the cruel young man tripped on the old piece of rope and fractured his ankle. He'd been so used to everything being put away tidily that he didn't even see it lying in the long grass. The young man was very angry. He squirted all of the dogs with the hose that day. Even then, he never thought of Larry Tangle. Even then, he didn't know that Larry Tangle was the best dog in the kennels. After all, Larry didn't even know it himself. But just before Larry Tangle died, he could sense it. He could feel it in his heart somehow. And maybe that's what matters most.